Yo, what's up, gents? Welcome in, and today we're talking about the final villain of One Piece. Yes, we're kind of getting to the end here. We think maybe another 5, 10 years. I don't know. There is still a lot of stuff to do that Oda likes to stretch out over a long time, but who knows? We are getting to the end, technically, as a whole. And the question really has to be asked, who is the final villain of One Piece? Because we've got a lot of moving parts, and I think a lot of people just assume it's going to be Emu, and we're gonna have a conversation about if it's Blackbeard or Emu because it's kind of like this triangle, right? We've got Blackbeard, Emu, and Luffy, and then we have a bunch of separate groups like Cross Guild, the Revolutionary Army, Shanks, a lot of different groups that have similar-ish interests. So let's go ahead and talk about it now. As I mentioned, a lot of people are probably thinking, hey, we're setting up Emu as the final villain of the story, and I'm not so sure. And one of the reasons I'm not so sure is like a lot of the stuff we learned with the Rock's flashback when he kind of infiltrated Marijois into the flower room, he tells Emu, I will be back. Now, why would Oda say that? Why would he have Rock say, I will be back? Of course, Rox was saying literally, hey, I will be back. But from an Oda perspective, after Rox is dead, that doesn't make any sense, right? Isn't that him telling him, hey, my bloodline will be back, kind of like a metaphor of sorts, which would be Marshall D. Teach. Also, from a motivation standpoint, right? Blackbeard's motivation versus Luffy's motivation to fight Emu. Blackbeard is a lot more motivated. Yes, Luffy doesn't like the world government. But outside of Ennie's lobby, we have never seen Luffy say, hey, I'm going to fight the world government. He did that just to get Robin back. In fact, we've had multiple times throughout the story where Luffy has said, hey, I'm not a hero. I'm a pirate. What I want to be is a pirate. So that means he would be, of course, going for the One Piece. Even after Egghead and Elbaf, we haven't seen Luffy say, I want to take down the world government. Maybe he's saying, I want to fight them. So with the Five Elders and Emu, unless they're fighting Luffy themselves, like going to Luffy, at this point in time, I don't know if Luffy has an exact reason to want to go to Marijois and take down Emu. Although it makes a lot of sense, right? The main character in the story, what seems like the biggest antagonist, currently the ruler of the entire world, it would make a ton of sense. So what are some reasons that Luffy could become someone that wants to fight Emu? And we'll talk about the order of Blackbeard and Emu in a second here. Well, potentially, if the kids get successfully kidnapped from Elbaf, that would mean that one, Luffy would have failed, and he'd probably be pretty angry. That would be a reason potentially for him to go to Marijois and say, okay, who's the highest? Someone tells him the Five Elders. He says, okay, damn, I'm going to go attack them. And then he learns about Emu, and that could be a reason. Other ways that he would be able to go to Marijois or would give a reason is potentially this whole Void Century thing, right? We go to Laugh Tale. Luffy finds the One Piece, and Oda has already told us the One Piece will have some hints of what happened during the Void Century. So Luffy could learn about the Void Century, what happened between the Ancient Kingdom and the 20 families, which are now the world government. And Luffy says, okay, I need to take them down. They're the wrongful rulers of the world, which, of course, the Celestial Dragons and now Emu. So that would be a reason Luffy would want to fight Emu, right? I'm kind of getting into who is going to be last here in a second. But doesn't it just not make a ton of sense for Luffy? Blackbeard's entire thing is, I want to take down the world government. They killed my father. They hunted me as a child. There's a lot of more serious motivation for Blackbeard. So, which kind of leads into who is last. We've established that it makes more sense for Blackbeard from a story standpoint, but who is truly gonna be last? Well, there's a couple contradicting things here, and I think we're gonna get the answer right after Elbaf. What do we do after Elbaf? Do we find the man marked by flames? Probably at Lodestar, because it would just make sense logistically. We haven't seen him yet. He could be at Lodestar. And then we go to Laugh Tale. Or do we go to Hachinosu? Garp. I've said this before. I made a kind of a similar video about that entire situation on Hachinosu. What is happening with Garp? Right? When Luffy finds out about Garp, you would think he would immediately have a side quest and go to Hachinosu. If that were to happen, surely Luffy fights Blackbeard. At some point, right? Although I think it makes a ton of sense for Blackbeard to be the one that fights Emu, maybe that does happen. At some point, I think we're either going to fight Blackbeard at Hachinosu, or we're going to fight him at Laugh Tale. It just has to happen. Now, the question becomes, what is the timing of all of that? Because I just do not see Luffy going to Marijois before he goes to Laugh Tale. And if he's going to be at Laugh Tale finding the One Piece, surely he has to fight the other main pirate who is trying to get the One Piece. So we have Hachinosu, right? It just throws a wrench in everything. The question really is, When does Luffy find out? He doesn't currently know in Elbaf, and of course he has a lot going on, and who would tell him? But potentially it hits the world news, and Morgan like drops a news pamphlet from one of his pelicans or something, and then that would be a way he could find out. And he would say, "Okay, guys, guess what? We're going to Hachinosu right now. I'm not going to let this happen again." Similarly to what happened to Ace. Now, the whole idea potentially, of course, once Luffy figures out he's captured in the first place, that probably is reason enough to go. But are we going to get like news that Garp is about to be executed? Although it sounds like it could make sense because that's what happened to Ace, and this would be something similar for Luffy to be like, okay, not again. Why would Blackbeard execute Garp? He's trying to use him as a bargaining chip to have Beehive recognized as a country of the world government, which of course isn't going to happen. So that leads us to believe that potentially Blackbeard has a different kind of plan, similarly to when he became a warlord, with going into Impel Down and recruiting a bunch of really strong pirates in the lowest levels. That was kind of his true goal when he became a warlord. Okay. So maybe Blackbeard has something else up his sleeve. But if we go to Hachinosu, right, surely there's a fight. And surely Blackbeard and Luffy are involved. Potentially we have members of Sword, Bogard, which, I mean, come on, he should have done something in the first place, but I digress. Or if we go to Lodestar, we find the man marked by flames, get the last poneglyph, and then we go to Laughdale, in which case we will fight Blackbeard then, which really does then just leave Emu as the final villain. But then again, as I mentioned earlier, it doesn't make a ton of sense for Luffy to want to fight him. So what do I think is going to happen? As I said, I think Oda will really answer this question for us depending on where we're going to go after Elbaf. Potentially, we might just have a moment where we see Blackbeard going into Marijois himself. What I think is going to happen, I think just based off the panel of Rocks being in the flower room with that flashback of being like, hey, I will be back. I really want to say that I think Blackbeard is going to be the one that fights Emu and potentially. Now, we don't really know how he does this yet, so maybe he can't even have a third Devil Fruit. But potentially, Blackbeard is the one that steals if Emu has a Devil Fruit or if he's actually a devil. We're not sure yet. Steals Emu's Devil Fruit if that's possible, and then Blackbeard like regains his what he believes is his right to be a king. And then as Blackbeard becomes the final true ruler, Luffy will fight him. Which in the storyline that they fight at Laughtale, that still does make some sense because okay, fine, we have the world government get defeated before we go to Laughtale. Which I think a lot of people were thinking we'd go to Laughtale, learn about the Void Sentry, and then go to Marijois and fight him. But as I said, it just doesn't make a ton of sense. Blackbeard fighting Emu, destroying the world government, and then when we meet him at Laughtale, we have a fight. Yes, I think that's kind of the minority opinion. If you guys have any thoughts, let me know. I think most people are predicting Emu to be the final villain, but I think it's going to be Blackbeard. And as I said, the only thing that throws a wrench in that really is Hachinosu. Because if we go to Hachinosu right after we finish in Elbaf, doesn't that mean then Emu has to be the final villain by default? Because we're going to go fight Blackbeard at Hachinosu. That's going to happen. And then we go fight the world government. That is also a real possibility that could make a ton of sense. But anyways, sorry for the shorter video today. But if you guys could leave a sub and like, it would help the channel a lot. We've been kind of cranking out One Piece videos here, talking about different topics. Some current events, some non-so current events. So if you leave a like and sub, it would help a lot. And I will see you guys later. Appreciate you watching.